Hi everybody, it's another Sunday and I thought I'd read today's stories outside. You'll probably periodically hear my dogs barking in the house. Can't avoid it. So I hope everyone's having a great Sunday. We went through a flash flood last night. I'll try to give you some camera shots after I read stories. So this might be a little bit longer of a video than normal and I apologize for that. Today we're going to read a story from When the Banks Closed, We Opened Our Hearts. Excuse me. And this is from the desk of Clancy Strock. And he's writing to his granddaughter. Dear Katie, when I was your age, a bank was a big, solid-looking building with bars on the windows and a uniformed guard standing inside. In the back was an awesome place called the Vault, where I was pretty sure they kept everyone's money, including $8.45 of my own. With its enormous steel door, that vault was awesomely impressive. But today, the bank, where we get our money, is often a little place in the local shopping mall. The cash is inside a contraption about the size of a big television set. Feed it a plastic card, punch in some magic numbers, and it spits out your money. Whether we're talking about an impressive building or an electronic marvel, ready to serve you 24 hours a day, consider this. What if tomorrow morning, not a single bank anywhere opened its doors, and none of those cash machines had any money? You say, just go use your Visa card. Good idea. But during the Great Depression, credit cards hadn't been invented yet. Well, you say, why not write a check? That's what Mom and Dad do when they pay their bills. Another fine idea, Katie. But when the banks close their doors, no one will take their checks. Just imagine a world where one morning no one has any money except a few dollars in their pocketbooks. How do you buy groceries and gas? How do you pay for your school lunch? How do you get into a movie or buy clothes or even get an ice cream cone? Without money, how could your dad pay the people who work for him? And if they didn't get paid, would they keep coming to work every day? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? But in actuality, it happened during the Great Depression. Eventually, most of the banks reopened. Some never did, though, and people who had savings accounts with them lost everything they'd worked so hard for their entire lives. You're hearing a cardinal, guys. As a result, lots of older citizens never trusted banks ever again. Some actually buried their money in cans or jars out in the backyard. Others hid it under the floorboards or in their mattresses. That's why even now we sometimes read of money being found in the strangest places years and years later. One of the first things President Roosevelt did in 1932 was to have Congress pass laws to protect the people from bank failures. The results can be seen in the bank ads in your local newspaper. Somewhere near the bottom you'll see a little FDIC emblem and the words FDIC insured. That means the government will pay off the bank customers should the bank ever go out of business. People can't lose their life savings. That's one good idea to come out of the chaos that occurred the day the banks closed. And then we'll go into the first story. Dad's strong leadership kept small bank open. From 1925 until his death in 1938, and this story is by Frederick Olson in Wisconsin. My father was president of the Wauwatosa State Bank outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Banks had closed during previous panics and depressions, but the Great Depression was particularly harsh on financial institutions. Few Americans had participated in the orgy of stock market speculation that preceded the crash, but many had deposited their savings in banks for a rainy day. For many people, it was now pouring. By 1931, banks were hard-pressed to pay off depositors on demand, and many were forced to close. Depositors were increasingly nervous and angry. "It's our money," they'd shout. "Why can't we get it out?" Unfortunately, the prosperity of the 1920s made some bankers less prudent than they should have been with other people's money. There was no federal insurance for deposits as there is today. As the Depression deepened, so did my father's concern. As a bank officer and director, he had a substantial investment in bank stock. If the bank closed, he would not only have to forfeit the value of his stock, but match its value in cash to pay off depositors. But worries about his own liability were incidental. My father's primary concern was for the depositors. During one tense period, my father almost dreaded going to work, lest he find a long line of depositors screaming and demanding for their money. I suspected those worries shortened his life. Runs on banks could occur whenever another bank closed. No matter how strong a bank was, it couldn't withstand the demands of a large number of depositors for their cash. It had too much money tied up in loans and investments. A bank's best safeguard was a reputation for solvency and conservative practices, and my father's bank had that. But it wasn't easy to maintain a tiny bank when big banks were in trouble and the bank down the street was going through the ringer. The lender of last resort. In 1931, President Herbert Hoover persuaded Congress to create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, a federal lender of last resort for financial institutions and businesses. Banks threatened with liquidation were encouraged to use their assets to obtain RFC loans. Every bank in Milwaukee County that survived the Depression borrowed from the RFC sooner or later, except my father's bank. He filled a valise with about $250,000 in bank securities and took them by train to Chicago to gain prior RFC loan approval in case of an emergency. But his bank never had to ask the RFC for the money, and he was justifiably very proud of that. When FDR took office, he ordered all banks temporarily closed on his inauguration day to forestall further runs until each bank could be reviewed and approved for reopening. On that historic Saturday morning, my father sweated out the closing order. He had little cash in his pocket, but because of his position, he felt he couldn't withdraw even a few dollars from his own account to tide us over for the weekend. Wauwatosa State Bank reopened after a government agency reviewed its balance sheets and assets. Later that year, my father asked the state banking commissioner for permission to pay a dividend, an almost unprecedented request. The bank was making money in spite of the Great Depression. Okay, that's that story from that book. And now we're going to read from We Survived and Thrived. This is called Depression Energy Crisis by Virginia Petropoulos Killo. Most of us remember the energy crisis of the 1980s when motorists lined up in long queues to buy gas and many public buildings covered windows and turned down thermostats to conserve their energy. But in a small personal way, I had already been through an energy crisis once before. It happened to me, as it happened to many others, during my childhood back in the Great Depression. One day the electric bill came. Mama, calmly ignoring it, went down to the basement, brought up an old kerosene lamp. What had been a sentiment-filled reminder of her early life in the country was about to be restored to a usual life. I was given a nickel and a quart milk bottle and instructions to buy 5 cents worth of kerosene from the corner gas station. When the electricity was shut off a few days later, we were ready. Of course, we missed the radio, but there were always books from the library. Some of my happiest memories are of the 6 of us sitting around the kitchen table, reading or playing checkers, or a quiet game of dominoes in the warm glow of that kerosene lamp. Hot water? There was the tea kettle. Baths? Saturday nights only. Refrigeration? We didn't even have an ice box, so that was the least of our worries. Mama kept the milk and the butter on the icy back porch all winter. In summer, we bought only what we could use immediately. Soon after this, the gas bill came. It, too, was an impossible hurdle. Daddy went out and brought home our stove for the duration, a long 3-burner kerosene model with a separate little tin oven to perch on top. At times, this stove gave off a terrible odor, but it was a source of heat, and we had macaroni and lentils and homemade bread in winter. And in the summer, green bean stew from the garden. The cooking problem was solved. For heat, we still had the old coal furnace. We closed off 3 enclosed porches to conserve our small coal supply. That dwindling pile of coal must have been a nightmare to my father on cold January nights. About this time, he acquired what I thought was a rather peculiar habit. He would put a bushel basket on my sister's wagon, walk down to a certain spot on a nearby railroad track where odd pieces of coal were sometimes scattered about. When he came home, the bushel basket was full of beautiful, hard, black, shiny coal, patiently gathered piece by piece, even when it had a jewel-like quality to me, like black emeralds. That was how our father kept us warm. Of course, we had long since put the car safely away in the garage. It had not been driven for months upon months. Daddy put it up on blocks to save the tires, and we walked. We were in walking distance of everything. We walked to school, to the parks, to the forest preserve, to the library, and to church. It was 5 miles to the zoo, 5 miles back. But we walked. In particular, I remember spending that Thanksgiving with our dearest friends who lived far, far on the other side of town. I remember the warm welcome, the laughter, the pumpkin pie. Mama carried over the feasting, and then the walk home, the 6 of us all together in the darkness, moving contentedly, quietly, through the soft flakes of the first snowfall of that enchanted year. I suppose those simple ways of facing a crisis are beyond the reach of most of us these days. But once upon a time, that was the way it was to survive. And I'm going to read one more called The Poor House. This was by Faye Mackenzie. As a child, I truly believed there was a place called the Poor House. It was located somewhere in northern Wisconsin where I lived. Details were never supplied, but I assumed it was a large, dark, gloomy building with iron bars at the windows and surrounded by barren land. It would be desolate and cold. You would sleep on a bed of straw, and they wouldn't feed you. But if you were there, it would only be because you deserved it. The poorhouse was where you were certain to end up if you lived beyond your means. Do you want us to have to go to the poorhouse? My grandmother used to say. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, an answer to any silly request for an unnecessary item. In the post-Depression days of the 1930s, living in the country, we knew no particular social class. We knew no one who had more than we did, and we knew no one that had less. Neat rows of trees lined the rural roads. Their orderly lines said they had been planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, as it was called. With men struggling to support their families, such programs were set up by President Franklin D. Roosevelt to help the working class regain some measure of financial security. I was very lucky. We lived in a nice log cabin built by my father just a mile down the road from my grandmother's farm. My mother sewed my clothes, and my brother Jack and I shared a beautiful collie dog named Skippy. I was also the proud sole owner of a wooden bank shaped like a clock, and I allowed myself the extravagance of coveting nickels for it. It apparently was my grandmother's duty to reinforce more conservation qualities in me. I once asked her, "Where is the poorhouse?" "Over the hill," she said, and that was all there was to that. She refused to be drawn into an in-depth discussion of the matter. Years later, I heard her say, "I always kept a $100 bill in the sewing machine drawer for emergencies." Whether this was a fact or not, I never knew. I never saw the bill, but I had no reason to doubt what she said. A sewing machine salesman had swept the countryside with a surefire sales pitch, a demonstration of how the wonderful Singer treadle sewing machine could actually sew through a wet shingle, and so it did. I supposed if a $100 bill, or any other treasure for that matter, lurked in the farmhouse, the sewing machine drawer would be the perfect place for it. Judicious planning and careful spending, however, were expected to prevent emergency situations. Any desire for store-bought dresses and shoes was satisfied by daydreaming in a world of fantasy with the Wish Book, a catalog from Sears, Roebuck and Company, or Montgomery Ward's, or, as we called them, Sears and Sawbuck and Monkey Ward. Those catalogs became worn and dog-eared in short order. We did a great deal of shopping through mail order, not for frilly dresses or patent leather shoes, but most likely for a long winter underwear and warm snuggies. I dreamed for a lot of things, but dared not ask. The promise of the poorhouse was a powerful force. When we moved into town, my spending habits underwent no severe change. I remained frugal. One Christmas, I was given 50 cents for shopping, and I was allowed to go to the store by myself. There is a big little book for 10 cents for Jack and a lovingly genuine gold brooch for 15 cents for my mother. When I had finished my selections for all the family, I still clutched an Indian head nickel. The poorhouse people would never see me. I had never heard of anyone having or using charge accounts. The first time I went grocery shopping with my friend Wheezy, she left the store with a sack of groceries without any money changing hands. It was difficult to control myself until the bell on the door changed behind us. "Wheezy," I said quietly, so the grocer wouldn't hear me. "You didn't pay him?" "Oh," she said lightly, "we don't pay here." That was all she said, but I certainly knew where she and her family were going to have to go someday. I drove past my grandmother's farm today, my purse full of charge cards, and in a car that won't be mine for a few more payments yet. Suddenly, I missed the good old days when we saved first, bought later. We took better care of our things then, and after all, we counted our pennies and thought a long time before purchasing anything. The farm is empty now, and Grandma is gone, but her basic, honest philosophy remains. Do you want to go to the poorhouse? It was not a threat. It was a reminder to live decently and realistically within our means. Besides, there were some things more important than luxuries that no amount of money could buy. Wasn't the love we shared among our family the most valuable possession of all? So that's today's stories, folks, and I hope you enjoyed it. I always enjoy reading these stories. Every time I read one, it just leaves me in awe of what these people went through and how strong they were. I'm going to go ahead and scan. A lot of the water has receded. It was pretty scary yesterday, so let me swing the camera and show you. I'll turn this so I can see what I'm camera showing. The fields still have water in them. It looked like a lake yesterday, and I'll try to zoom in so you can get a better shot. The water was almost to this pine tree right here yesterday. So it has receded some, but you can still see off in the distance in the field. And half my garden was completely underwater. And way down here, you can still see water that's still standing. Let's see if I can zoom in anymore for you. Can you see that? That's all water. Those are my fruit trees, my baby fruit trees I planted last year. So half my bed was underwater. And it was flooded all the way up to almost this maple tree right here. And you can still see some water standing way in the back by the chicken coop. So it's gone down a lot. The ditches all the way around our property were completely full and overflowing. So I'm just trying to give you kind of a, I hope I'm not making you dizzy, but I'm trying to give you kind of a view. The ditches over here were completely overflowing into the driveway. I mean, it was flooding everywhere again. And before we got the storm, the flash flood, and the horrendous rains yesterday, the day or two before when we had really nice weather, I had gotten most of my tomatoes and peppers and everything in the garden. See if I can zoom in. I don't know if they're going to survive or not. I haven't, everything's soggy. But I don't know if anything's going to survive from it being covered with water. These are strawberries, the big green. These are the tomato plants. Not sure if they're going to make it or not. But I had already gotten most of my stuff planted. Here's my onions. They're doing great. They didn't flood. Lettuce. Onions. Okay, guys. I hope you have a great Sunday. Be safe. I love you, and thank you for everyone that has subscribed. Don't forget to click the thumbs up. It helps my channel. I'm a very tiny channel, and I could use all the help I can get. Referrals to people in the YouTube community, and please keep giving me the thumbs up and encouraging me. I appreciate it so much. Have a great day. Bye.